can.
I should have died from that so long ago. I got pictures of me when I taught school in the 1970s. Only in that day, it was tab. Nobody even knows what that is now.
I do. Oh, I do.
Um,
I remember that funny thing on social media once that said, remember the days in the summer as kids where we used to leave early in the morning and come home late at night and our mothers had no idea where we were and they would sit on the porch drinking tab. Cell phones, nothing tethering everybody to everybody. It was like,
I tell those stories quite often. We lived right by Evergreen Park and Mill Creek, and we really would. I had one twin brother. My mom would pack us lunch at 6 years old, and we would not come home until everybody else came home.
Long after dark.
Right.
Until the street lights came on. That was our
Another anachronism.
good old days.
All right. I think we are here. We're chatting. Somebody's chatting. Oh, tab. And it back goes to the diner and the foodies ask for a tab and there's fun. I can't. Oh, thanks, David, for that that movie reference. My own children aren't here, so you'll have to fill in. I think that everyone is here who needs to be for the moment. And my name is Carol Lear. I'm the not chair of much, but I'm the chair of the Law and Licensing Committee. And I welcome you to this meeting on April 9th. So with that, I will just have every committee member introduce himself, herself, so that we that the public is aware of who the committee is and who will be talking today. So go ahead, Randy Booth go ahead, Randy.
Randy Booth from District 13, and I am the Vice Chair of Law and Licensing Committee.
And Natalie.
My name is Natalie Klein. I'm over District 11, which includes South Jordan, Harriman, Riverton, Saratoga Springs, Cedar Fort, and a little bit of Midville Elementary in the canyons, those schools.
Thank you. And Cindy Davis.
Good morning, Cindy Davis, represent District 9 and hopefully all kids in the state. And I'm in the northern Utah County portion of the world and around Utah Lake down into the west part of Nebo District.
Thank you. And Member Hymas.
Apologies, mute button gave me a hard time, but I'm Matt Hymas. I am on, I serve District 3, which is West Valley Magna areas and Tooele County and Juab County. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all the staff people who are here and those who are also participating on various items. We appreciate that you're here early in the morning and always very prompt. Thank you. So with that, we'll begin unless there are any other preliminary issues, and I think we will be okay on that. So we'll just start with the first item on the agenda, which is the transfer process from one of our new authorizers, new charter school authorizers, Utah State University. And with that very brief introduction, I will turn the time to Dallin. And Dallin, pronounce your last name. Would you do that?
It's Pinier.
Oh, that wasn't bad. My college French held out for me. There you go. So
no, you're exactly right. It's French.
Daniel's going to explain the, he's the liaison between the state board and the charter board and helps us with these kinds of things. So he will explain this transfer process.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm just here to give a brief introduction, and then after that, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Parker Fossen and David Forbush. But again, good morning, everyone. My name is Dallin Pinier. As board member Lear said, I am the Charter Authorizer Liaison. I'm also a school finance specialist with USBE. Today, Utah State University's Center for the Schools of the Future would like to present their charter school authorizer transfer process to the Law and Licensing Committee for approval. Board Rule R277-552-3 requires an authorizer to submit a process to the board for approval of A, a new charter school, B, a request from a school to change authorizers, C, a charter school expansion, or D, a satellite school. Last year, Utah State University Center for the Schools of the Future submitted their board, submitted to the board for approval their processes for a new charter school, a charter school expansion, a satellite school, as well as their remediation process, which were approved. And so Utah State University Center for the Schools of the Future has previously submitted their transfer process to USBE staff for review and revised their transfer process to include all staff feedback. So at this time, I would like to turn the time over to Parker Fossen and David Forbush for further presentation.
Thanks, Dallin. Please.
Thank you, Dallin, and thank you, Chair Lear. My name is Parker Fossen. I direct the Center for the School of the Future at Utah State University. The center was established by state statute and placed at USU with a statewide mission to impact learning across the state in K-12. We've been designated by the USU Board of Trustees as an organization within the university to help them manage the application process for charter authorization. And let me introduce Dr. David Forbush, who's the Associate Director of the Center for the School of the Future, who will lay out our rationale for transfer schools.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the time that you've given us this morning to just review our process. Chair Lear, you've asked us to be brief, and we will be this morning, but what you've read, if you've had an opportunity to review our process, is that we are looking at student learning as a focus in our transfer work and in new school authorization. And so it's our contention that if we look to student learning data, we can get a sense of the trajectory of learning of an existing school and determine whether that school is a learning system that knows how to learn or is reactive to the product of their efforts, which is student learning. And so if you look down through, one of the first things we would do in our process, along with meeting the requirements of our set 277-5528, is that we would then take an extensive effort beyond that to make some determinations as to what degree a learning system is actually learning and has a way to make use of the product of their effort, which is student learning. So we would designate schools that wanted to transfer either as a profile 1, profile 2, or profile 3. Profile 1 is they demonstrate over time flat or descending student learning trajectories. So in other words, they're not demonstrating themselves as a learning system. They may be a learning system, but they're not a learning system that knows how to learn in terms of the learning product that the students are producing from them. So that particular stage, they could be designated based on our review of their past learning history as a learning profile 2, which is an ascending student learning performance trajectory that they've demonstrated that over time their students continue to produce higher and higher levels of performance, and which would suggest that they are taking data from their student learning, inputting it into the system, and the system is learning and finding ways to produce higher levels of learning. And then the final profile, profile 3, that they demonstrate, which there are not many in the state, a steep student learning performance trajectory. In other words, they are not only learning, but they're learning at a rapid rate, and that trajectory of the data is inclining at a significant incline. So just quickly, if we look at profile 1, flat or a descending student learning trajectory, you will have noticed that the extensive effort we will be going through to vet those types of requests for transfer are as extensive as they are because we are engaged in a process of determining the extent to which the school can make changes, install those changes, hold them in place for long enough that they can actually start to bring about a learning result that's significantly different. So that's really the process that we're working through. We have 7 stages in that. Here, profile 1, we're going to take you through 7 stages, or at least we're going to take you through a number of stages to determine whether we would actually invite your application into our portfolio. So quickly, stage 1, preliminary application document. For all of them will need to submit the R277552-8 requirements. So that's the first piece that's required. And then from there, we would make a determination whether to invite them to the next stage. Stage number 2 is USU CSF accountability assessment. When we submitted our new school process, we have an accountability process there, and it's a multi-tiered system of accountability. And we would want to know before we even considered inviting a school on to transfer the extensive amount of resources that would be required to support them. So if right out of the gate we score them and find that they're a tier 3 within our system, or a tier 2 and not a tier 1, meaning that they need more intensive supports, we would want to recognize not only the needs that they have, but also the resources that we have that we could make to their need to try to address their, to bring them to a far higher level of learning. Stage 3 is if we invite them on, we would require them to complete a gap and root cause analysis. So they would first complete a gap analysis within their student data, could be in reading, mathematics, science, any of the areas that are assessed in the state. And the purpose of this stage is to find out the extent to which they have skill and capability of completing a gap, recognizing where their gaps are. And then once they recognize that gap, then we would ask that they engage in a root cause analysis to determine why are the students performing as they performed, and what are the root causes of that performance deficit. So that's stage 3. If we invite them on to stage 4, intervention plan addressing root cause and discontinuation analysis. So the first part of that is that we would invite them to, once you identify the root cause of your students' learning deficits, and then the next step would be, how are we going to intervene? What's your plan to do so? And if you've read, there are multiple levels where they would first measure demonstrate to us how they would go ahead with measuring the implementation of their processes to impact that root cause. Level 2 measure would be impact of the implemented intervention on student learning. So if you've got your intervention installed and securely in place, how are you going to measure whether it's having the impact that was desired in terms of student learning? And then level 3, measure how that student learning is systemically evolving your system so that you make good on what you're learning as a system, and you install what you're learning within the system, as opposed to it's just a brief intervention and it goes away when you stop. And then finally, they would complete what we're referring to as a discontinuation analysis. One of the problems that we have in education is that we add layer upon layer upon layer of different types of interventions and supports that often don't produce the outcome that you want, and then continue to exist after the need is gone. And so we would be looking for them to strip down some of the past services and efforts that are not producing the outcome that it should, so that they actually have resource and time and effort to accomplish the implementation of this new intervention plan. Stage 5, we would do an internal review. This doesn't require the applicant to do anything, but it would be an opportunity for USU to look at what the, to measure twice before we cut, to look at what the needs are of the organization, what our capacity is, and as it relates to other groups in our portfolio, and then determine whether we would have the right resources to address the need to bring that particular school to a higher level of learning. And then stage 7 would be a final internal decision and charter agreement. And that decision would be not us at CSF determining whether they would be admitted into our portfolio, but determining whether we would recommend to our board of trustees as to whether they should be admitted into our portfolio. So that's it's your learning profile number 1. I won't go through 2 and 3, but 2 requires far less effort to evaluate, and even less for profile 3. So if they're already a learning organization, they've got a learning profile that's showing that students are learning at a higher level, then we would be vetting them with fewer steps because they've already demonstrated that they have the operational side and the curriculum and instructional side to bring about student learning and know how to make good use of the learning effects of their system. So with that, let me stop, and Carol, I hope that was brief enough.
That was perfect.
Thank you.
That's really helpful, and clearly you've thought through things. We have already a couple of questions from committee members. Before we go to the committee members, let me make sure, and maybe Deputy Superintendent Stallings or her assistant Kathy Helgeson can confirm that is there anyone that wanted to speak, any member of the public that wanted to speak to any of this? And you can just shake your heads, or Kathy, Angie, did you?
Forbush and Dr.
The
Foster.
2 of those gentlemen, right? But there was no other public member before we jump into the committee discussion. Vice Chair Booth, would you, ask a question or make a comment?
Dr. Forbush, I was just impressed with the level of intensity of your review. The 7 stages, of course, are going to take a considerable amount of time, and I'm just wondering about what kind of faculty and staff load you have available to take care of that kind of intensive review. If you had a number of applicants, is your organization prepared to be able to deal with that and still continue the ongoing work of your school?
I think that's an excellent question. We certainly are prepared. We know that we have to scale up based on need. And so we believe that we've been vetting new school applications and have successfully done that. We have our staff at CSF. We also have some affiliates in the university that we're working with to help us with our work. And so what we present is not only the Center for the School of the Future, but Utah State University in its entirety as a body that can help us with the work that we're doing. And so we have the capability of scaling up and scaling down as necessary to accomplish the work. But I will say also that 60 days to vet if we get profile 1s, there's no question it will keep us busy for the 60 days to work through the process. And so we will be organizing to accomplish that work. And I would also note that we may not see some groups move beyond stage 1 in our process, because if we look at it and look at the learning data and get a sense of who they are and their systems and their ability to make changes, we may not take them very far in our process. So that's a determination that needs to be made as we receive interest. So
Thank you, Dr. Forbush.
you're very welcome.
You. Thanks much. That was a question I had also. Member Klein.
Okay, thank you. I was really impressed with the process that you came up with. Very thorough. There was one part that stood out to me, and I wasn't sure. I wanted to just seek some clarification on it on stage 3. Um, and my concerns were amplified when I read the supporting documents regarding that. So in the supporting documents on page 3, it says that you were asked in your gap analysis to, what does it say? To disaggregate by different student population types, so as not to mask any student population needs. I was initially, I thought, okay, well, maybe we're talking about, I don't know, I didn't know what kind of population groups it was referring to until the next paragraph where it says they're looking for root causes based on Hispanic learners versus Caucasian children. I'm sure that's just one example of the populations that you would do it in, but I couldn't help but think as a Caucasian, or with children that are Caucasian, what kind of root causes might be assigned to white children that might be different than Hispanic children. And I was concerned with this because in my mind, that is racial stereotyping, where every student has different needs. Every student comes from different backgrounds, has individual unique circumstances. And so to lump them all in to these racial groups to find a root cause, I think is actually is going to do the exact opposite of what the recommendation said that it will. They said it that we were needing to break it down that way as to not mask any student population needs, when I would argue that that's exactly what it would do, is mask the individual needs of those students. And where it, in the following paragraph where it says paying particular attention to ferreting out root causes, which may be different for different populations of students, that to me it is unnecessary. The way you had it before was much more equitable, where it looks at every student individually instead of putting them in these groups, which inherently creates inequity by assuming things about a student that may or may not be true.
Well, I think that's, if I can address that, I think you've said that so beautifully. What I would say with regard to that, we were in the root cause analysis, we indicated the first one was narrow, and it was really an effort to try to determine if they had chops in that area, their ability to actually engage in a root cause analysis, gap analysis, root cause analysis, and then work down. And then the feedback that we received was that we wanted to be careful to ensure that to disaggregate the data so that we could get deeper into whether there might be some aspects for different groups that would require a different sort of treatment. And I think what you've said is absolutely appropriate, and that is that we have to be very careful. There's a wonderful book, it's called The Mismeasure of Man by Stephen Gould, that looks at, if you haven't read that, and it sounds like you might appreciate this, but it gets at the effort that we've made over the years to try to understand the different aspects of mankind and how we've assessed, and then how we've followed that with inappropriate actions in relationship to our discovery through testing. And so I think what I could tell you is that we would be very, very careful that as those kinds of analyses were accomplished, that appropriate actions were taken against them, and recognizing that within every student group, there's individuals, and the individuals probably show more variability than the group themselves, between the group themselves. And so I guess what I would want you to understand is that we understand our interest as we look at those root cause analyses is to, the first recognition is that we don't have a science that demonstrates, at least one I am aware of at this point, we don't have a science instructionally at this point that would tell us to teach every child extensively differently. We have data and research that shows that the good instruction is good instruction, and it washes across most kids, and there may be some small adaptations that are made. So without going further, I hope that responds in some part to what your concern is.
Well, I I appreciate your explanation. I still hold to the fact that if we're going to do disaggregating, then it shouldn't be based on racial lines, because otherwise, if we use those, then we come down and we find that one is less than another, and we say that the root cause is racial, which is what we're implying by disaggregating them that way, then we are inherently saying that certain races aren't as intelligent or as capable as others. And I appreciate that you said and recognize that there is more variation and disparity within any particular group than comparing one group to another. And so, if there are, it would make sense to maybe disaggregate based on English language learners or disabilities, just for basic disaggregation, because those students do have their unique struggles in learning, because they have a learning curve that they have to meet, right? And those that are disabled or handicapped in some way, that's an appropriate disaggregation. The racial, there's absolutely no basis for the racial disaggregation. So I wouldn't be voting for this if that was part of it, which is what is mentioned in the paragraph comparing Hispanic to Caucasian.
We'd be very comfortable with changing that and altering that to reflect that disaggregation should be done as student performance data, that we would be looking at student performance data to determine if there's groups of kids in terms of their performance that may need, that there may be some different type of instructional treatment that's needed for certain groups, and also just the distinctions that you mentioned, which is that English language and students with disabilities. So we would be comfortable with making adaptations there in the language and in our process.
I apologize. My computer booted me out, so I'm not sure if you said something to me after that, but.
Yeah, I was just saying that we would be very comfortable with making the kinds of language changes that you're requesting and focusing on disaggregating by student performance data to better understand, but also by students that are English language learners and students with disabilities, and so that we can again determine if there's different sorts of instructional interventions that need to be applied for different groups of kids, and being heavier on how they perform as opposed to any other factor.
Thank you.
And I appreciate both your comments. I think this is one of those things that it would behoove the board to pay attention to your authorizing process and seeing if this is just an example. And I absolutely hear what Natalie's saying about even as an example, it's concerning, but we could also watch the process and see if it plays out in a neutral way versus in some kind of concerning discriminatory way. So I think maybe the proof of this will be how it actually goes forward, which is, one of the challenges. I would believe, I'm not an academic, but one of the challenges of being an academic is seeing if your depth of knowledge actually works with a real school with real students. Members Cindy Davis, and then Matt Hymas.
Thank you. I can appreciate, disaggregating and looking at student data, but I think what you've included here shows that you understand learning in general, not from an individual learning way, but we do disaggregate and look at these macro level trends, because sometimes it's not just an English language learner, and I see you nodding because you understand this, but there are sometimes cultural pieces that impact how students learn. It has nothing to do with a student being less intelligent or less capable. as an entire group. It's not about that. It's a completely different paradigm. So I think, we just need to be careful as we move forward. What you've written here shows me that you understand we have disaggregated data for reasons that help us to understand learning. And sometimes there are cultural impacts on learning. It's not in any way to try to show that a group is less capable or smart than another group. But my questions really stem around your operations, your business operations. I really think that we have to take a look right now at our schools. And while we would love to have 90% of our focus be on the student learning, as it should be, the world is such that we really have to have half of our focus on our student learning, but we've got to have the other half of our focus and our brains looking at operations and what's happening operationally in our schools. And so, we're asking you, I see so much detail put into the academic assessment of schools that may be transferring to you. And I see less detail other than a list of documents that will be sent to you for, finances and operations and legal compliance and such as that. So, here's a thought from some of our monitors, because as you know, and I think we discussed this the last time you were here, USBE will be monitoring USU as USU monitors your schools and your charter schools, right? And so here are some things that, as I've contacted our monitors, our financial monitors, here's some feedback and things that I would personally love to see incorporated into this document before it comes to the full board. From a business operations standpoint, make sure that the funds support your plan and innovation. Don't leverage yourself with unreasonable or high lease rates, for example. Ensure that you can open and operate in an allowable way, or a school that's already open can operate in an allowable way with the funds available, while at the same time providing the service that you want and the new innovations you want for the students. Control and manage your funds in as few systems as possible, maximizing interoperability between your general ledger and, for example, your payroll. So and they are saying, if you take a school that doesn't have in place, if you take a school that doesn't have those things in place, that you as the authorizer are willing to own those shortcomings. That's really kind of what it boils down to. Do you have a plan? And I guess this is a question for you today. Do you have a plan for how you will address the business operations of the school? I keep getting more text, so that's something you can answer in a minute. Anyway, for example,
sorry. Did that have a question?
Sorry. Will you apply a particular model? Who will you look at to run the operations? Are you going to allow current operators, or are you going to insist on particular operators? Those are questions for today, I guess. So let me just repeat those questions. Do you have a plan for how you'll address business operations of the school? Will you apply a particular model? Who are you going to look to run the operations, like an outside private company? And will you allow the current operators, or are you going to insist on certain particular operators? What's your plan in that area?
Dr.
Yeah.
Forbush.
Thank you. Let me see if I can address that, and let me start a little bit broad and not take too long, and then come more narrow to the very specific questions that you've raised. One of the problems that we believe that occurs in education is that we separate the instructional, the curriculum, the assessment elements away from the system itself, the operational side. We recognize that the totality of a school, including the business operations, should be pointed towards student performance and learning. That's why schools exist. They don't exist to be business operations. They exist to business operations should support student learning. And so we recognize that and are working with colleagues from the Huntsman School of Business, some affiliates that we're working with in terms of looking at that have deep business knowledge and operational knowledge. And also, I think that within our body, we have people that have extensive school-based experience and understand how to make use of the business operation to benefit student learning. And so I come back to student learning only because we don't believe that schools or businesses to exist separate from the learning, that the business operations exist to support the learning. So with that said, you had some specific questions. And the first is who would we be working with? And first of all, the schools that would seek to transfer to us would be seeking to transfer to us with those that are already organized, operating, using an operational system within their school. That would have to be determined as we review them as to whether their operational side of their organization is one that would actually produce, be successful in and of itself, but importantly, as we've indicated, could actually support learning and do so in a strategic way. So we wouldn't, so the answer to the first question is we're not looking to say that you, if you come into our portfolio, that you have to give away your operational system or those that you're working with. You would be bringing that with you if we invite you into the process. And I hope that you're hearing also, Chair Davis, that we're not looking to build a large portfolio. And in fact, I think our processes are indicating that for us to select you in, you're going to go through an extensive experience where we can determine whether it would be a good marriage, basically, and that would include the business operation. So that was the first question, I think. The second question I'm trying to remember was, do we have a particular model? I would say that we would be, from an empirical or a research standpoint, we're looking for models that actually produce learning. And so if you have a business model that has been put in place that actually is producing desirable learning trajectories in students, we would want to understand that model and have you even refine it further, because it likely will have to produce even higher levels of student learning. So we're not looking for a particular model. We'd certainly want to have models being applied that would meet the compliance requirements of the state, and there are many, as you know, even in the financial area. But from there, we would be looking at, as we would also look at the instructional side of schools, what's producing the results and where are they coming from, and should those models be replicated and further supported and extended? Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. I would love to hear you say something like, this particular school has a model that we have found is really or successful, or these few schools or what have you. I guess
I think we will discover that as we go along. If you don't want to insert, in that we're early in this game, we have processes. We'll be watching the kinds of data that come out, and we'll, I think, be able to make those kinds of statements. But we can't make those statements yet. We haven't been deep enough into any system to be able to direct that, and so, or to make any sort of statement in that matter.
Cindy?
Yeah, if I can follow up, I mean, I know that we are deep into the learning understandings, but we have to go a little bit also deep into operational understandings. And so that's where I'm asking, before this comes back to the full board, if you can do some of your discovery and research and then let us know within this document when it comes back to the full board what the process is going to be that you are going to use to determine the financial position of a school applying. I know you have a list of documents that are required to be submitted. Well, what then will you do with those documents? What will your criteria be to determine financial viability, or what you can and can't do to help make that healthy, just as you're determining what you can and can't do to make the academic learning healthy in the school? So that's really what I'm asking, is to just maybe take a look at that side and beef it up, just the way you've done with this really thoughtful and thorough academic piece and understanding.
Thank you. I understand, and thank you very much.
Mr. Hymas has a comment. I just wanted to interject. As I think back over the charter schools that have had problems to the point of closure or near closure, I don't recall one that had those problems because the students, we never got to the point of deciding whether the students were doing poorly or well. The problems were operational. The schools were operating in the red. The schools were didn't maintain enough students to be financially stable or healthy. All of the problems, as I'm recalling, were operational. So as much as we'd like to believe this is all about student learning, there's also a real strong sort of business practical component to it. So I really second the concerns. And you almost don't know until you start doing it. Again, is my experience. But Mr. Hymas, you had a lot of patience. Thank you.
No, it's okay. I actually lowered my hand. Cindy asked some fantastic questions, and I have to agree with Chair Lear on this. Is in my experience as well. Most of the time, when a charter school closes, from what I've seen, it's been operational or financial concerns, and so I think it is wise to have that. We have seen a lot of fantastic academic information brought before us here today, and I did agree. Interestingly, I agreed with both Cindy and Natalie on their disaggregated data. I think it's important, as one who loves to review data, a math guy myself, I think that the more data, the better. And so if you can disaggregate that and look at all aspects, I know that there was some concern that it was strictly done on race or culture, but we know that there's many factors in that, and so the more the better, in my opinion. And of course, I know that you already know that. I did want to ask though, and this might be a silly question, I may have just missed it as I'm reading through here. USU is already an authorizer. Why the Center for the School of the Future? Why bring that in at this time? Can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, we as you know, it's IHEs that can authorize charter schools in the state of Utah. So institutions of higher education, and so our board of trustees at Utah State has enacted their authority to do that and have been approved to do that. And the Center for the School of the Future isn't just coming in now, but worked alongside of our board of trustees from the beginning to be their delegate in that matter. And so our purposes and effort are to help them to vet applications that come and then make recommendations to them for their consideration and final determination. So we've actually been walking alongside them from the beginning, which is about nearly 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago, that we started the process.
Maybe I could add in here too, it's very similar to the way the USB operates with their staff in USBE. You don't get necessarily get down into the weeds of the day-to-day, but you are the statutorily authorized body that makes decisions. That's similar to the Board of Trustees at Utah State. They've asked us to serve as almost a staff role for them to take on the day-to-day decisions about applications.
I hope I'm correct in saying that maybe Matt didn't understand this or does, but that the School for the Future is actually a part of USU. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're a center within the College of Education and
Right.
Human Services at USU, and so the board, when they activated their authorization authority, they asked us as a designee to do some of the legwork for them. And then, as David mentioned, when we're done with the vetting process, we circle back around, and they're actually the body that makes the decision on which schools are admitted into the USU portfolio.
Thank you. Would they actually have to be officially accepted also by the USU Board of Trustees? The schools?
Yeah, we don't have, the center isn't the decision-making body. We're just the application vetting body for.
You're the middleman.
We're the Angie Stallings and the Dallin of USU. We do the legwork and then circle back to the board. They're actually the body that make the determination.
So can I follow up, Chair, there?
Please.
Has there been transfers in the past, or is the transfer a new process?
We have not done any transfers because we knew that we had to approve the transfer process through the USB.
And then one more question, if I could.
Please.
I'm wondering, this sounds awfully close to like a management company, which is fine, but is that ultimately what this is? Is this another management company?
No, we're not a management company. We're part of USU. We're not interested. We're not interested in managing charter schools. We're interested in, as an institution, in authorizing charter schools and then looking at whether we can improve outcomes within those settings.
Matt, does that make
sense? The benefit, maybe I can just back up, Board Member Hymas, and say we kind of see one of the benefits for a university. We think there's a reason why the legislature put in statute that IHEs could authorize charter schools. If you can animate the extensive expertise that comes within a university and bring that to bear in partnership with K-12 schools, we think there's potentially some really huge benefits on both the operational side and learning side. So we're hoping to produce that through our partnerships with schools at USU.
And what do you get out of this then? I know these are basic questions. I apologize if it's.
No, I had some of the same questions. Please, go ahead.
Well, I think certainly one of the huge benefits for an institution like USU, a land-grant university with a footprint across the state, we're definitely interested in what comes into the pipeline of the university. So taking a look down into K-12 is obviously a very important piece of a university's interest in impacting the pipeline coming into a university. I would say that's probably one of the core interests the university has in looking at authorizing charter schools. If we can impact the pipeline and produce a different profile for students coming in the door, that benefits them and it benefits the work of the university. It brings some efficiencies to the state that we think are important.
You're
right.
Are you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask, and I'll come back to Member Klein in just a second, but can I ask a couple of questions more similar to Matt's? And maybe I was just thinking about this practically. But is your model set up to use some of the K-12 money that comes to your school will you pay other sections of the university to help you do the management? Is that some of your, is that your plan? Sort of like some charter schools pay management companies. Is that in your plan?
Well, again, we're early in the process, so we definitely know our expertise in the College of Education is around dramatic improvement in student learning. We've already partnered with other entities within the university, which is one of the great assets of having a university engaged with charter authorization. We've engaged with individuals, faculty members in the Huntsman School around, how do you fund the charter school? How do you set up the operational side to make sure those resources are used in a way that really impacts the overall outcomes that the board of a school wants to accomplish. So yeah, we aren't using them as a management company, but we certainly plan to animate the expertise within a university setting that we think will impact outcomes in K-12 charter schools.
And again, as I said before, those actual operational pieces have been the problem children sometimes for charter schools. How much do they pay for those services, and how clean are the books that show what's paid, and how did you make the decisions, and who do you rent the property from, and all those kinds of things. So it's reassuring to me, depending on cost, that you have a business program within USU that can help you make that decision. Not all charter authorizers have that expertise in their in-house. So I think.
Well, I think also if you consider the intellectual capital that the university now makes available through this process to charter schools, not only are we interested in what is in place within charter schools, but we're actively involved in exploring what are some better ways to navigate that process. So we have faculty colleagues who've already approached us about conducting research on both instructional processes as well as operational processes in charters, and how we can maybe provide an influx of information into that process that helps improve outcomes, both on the operational side and the instructional side.
Thank you. Just one more quick question, Natalie, and then I'll come back to you. Do you have schools on the horizon that are just ready to apply when this process is, in, when it's approved, are you to that point?
We've had contacts from schools that would like to engage us through our system to determine whether they could transfer. So,
okay.
So we have had some contacts.
I didn't get the impression when you came to the first meeting with the board or this committee that you were really looking for transfer schools. It seemed like you were more focused on authorizing schools, and I'm interested if this, and you don't need to respond. It just seems that maybe has changed, but maybe not. Maybe we just didn't explore the other. Natalie Member-Klein had another further question.
Yes, so I was just looking up the Center for the School of the Future and looking at your mission statement, vision statement, and under values, you have listed equity of student learning outcomes. And what does that mean? Do you have a definition for equity?
Oh dear.
How this affects the charter schools that are coming in, that you'll bring into this? Is this something that will be, do they have to subscribe to your particular mission statement, vision, and values?
We certainly would expect alignment with any school that wants to be in the USU portfolio with our mission, vision, values. The equity of opportunity and equity of outcomes question you raise, you know, it's no surprise that there are inequities in learning within K-12 schools. You know, you can look at NAEP data, you can look at RISE data, any of the publicly available information on this. And, you know, when you have, if you take NAEP data, when you have 38% of fourth grade children in the state of Utah that are reading proficiently, and you have 42% of students in fourth grade that are able to conduct math at a proficient level, there are some opportunity cost to that kind of an outcome. And so I think as a center, our aspiration that we've expressed in our mission, vision, and values is to bring to bear the intellectual capital within a university like ours to see if there's not a way to kick that up. Ultimately, we'd like to say the goal would be that any student working through a K-12 system in Utah develops the knowledge and capacity to be able to flourish throughout their life. There's no question that the labor market that lies in front of these children is going to demand something more than 38% proficiency in reading and 42% in math. And so our aspiration is to drive to that outcome. Is it real? Well, we'll see. But if we don't have the aspiration, we know it's not going to happen. So we're trying to inject something into the system that we think is profoundly important, that really drives opportunity for children. And so we do have passion towards equity of outcome in terms of learning.
So thank you. I'm noticing it doesn't say equity of opportunity or learning, equity of opportunity. It says equity of outcome, which
Yeah.
I think that's a great goal, to have everybody be successful. But again, there's only so much we can do. That there's a lot that depends on the student personal responsibility. My other concern is how equity is often tied with programs or trainings regarding critical race theory, and I probably would assume, except for that, just recently I received information about a new teacher workshop, the Benyon Teacher Workshop, that is sponsored by USU, where in their description they actually say the title of the workshop is Hidden in the Shadows of Democracy, Engaging and Teaching the Strength of Race and Difference.
So I think our value is very clear, as we stated in our CFS mission, vision, and values. We want any of the schools we work with to make the same kind of effort towards this opportunity for learning proficiency that we've designated, and we're certainly.
Apologize.
Oh, sorry, did I miss something?
It's okay. I'm back. My computer kicked me off.
Okay.
I apologize. If I can just finish what I was saying. In the description, it says this will not be just another diversity workshop. The goal of this workshop is to deliver practical material for teachers and administrators alike to incorporate in their classrooms and institutions. By the end of the workshop, participants will learn how to identify misinformation and misunderstandings they may have unconsciously accumulated over the years, and replace them with strength-based knowledge, develop pedagogical tools, curriculum, and materials rooted in social justice, define an anti-racist, culturally based approach to teaching, identify the strengths of students and communities traditionally characterized as marginalized, troubled, and problematic. That is the language of critical race theory. So I have concerns with that, as far as if this is USU's own teacher workshop program, and we're looking at having voting to have you as an authorizer, and that you require alignment with your and values.
No, the Center for the School of the Future is pretty clear in its mission, vision, and values that the equity we're talking about is learning opportunity. So when we talk about equity of opportunity, equity of outcome, we're looking at, and we state this in our mission, 100% proficiency on learning. We know that the children who come out of third grade without being proficient in reading or math are going to be at risk for failure. So we want to drive a different outcome in that regard. We're not, there are faculty members within our institution, as there is at any institution, that are looking at race as a factor in that. The center is focused on the learning side of this and are driving towards that outcome. I mean, the opposite of our view is that we would say if we didn't care passionately about students learning at high levels, we can't put a different goal in than 100% of our students in our client schools will reach proficiency levels. The option on that is what percent. Are we going to say that we're okay with 50%? And we know that's not an appropriate number. The other piece of this that is really important within the Center for the School of the Future is that the level that we put our expectation at is the level at which we access information to accomplish that. We know this from cognitive science, that if we set a high goal, we tend to access the knowledge that helps us achieve that. So what you're talking about, Board Member Klein, is a different issue than what we're talking about in the Center for the School of the Future. There are individuals within any institution that are pursuing research interests along those lines. I would say within the Center for the School of the Future, we're focused more on what is the equity that comes out of being able to read and conduct math at a high level, and then build additional knowledge in science and other academic areas to drive opportunity for kids to flourish throughout their lives.
All right. If in your proposal somehow you could include that you will not be pushing or requiring charter schools to align with any of these theories that they're not comfortable with, so that they remain free to choose their own course in the way they teach their kids, while still measuring up to the academic standards that you're setting.
Yeah, any school that would be brought into our portfolio, there'll be, as you see in our processes, there will be robust opportunities for both the institution and the charter school to explore the fit. And if that fit isn't present, we wouldn't want charter schools to come in thinking that we were going to micromanage their processes. That's certainly not our intent, or probably any authorizer's intent, but we do want to make sure that they have the capacity to achieve their goals. And our focus is very clear in the process. We've made that clear in our new school authorization process, as well as our transfer process, that we value student learning as a core outcome of education. And if a school doesn't align with that, they likely, as David said, they wouldn't be a good fit for our portfolio, and we probably wouldn't advance them through the process if they weren't committed to that outcome. And that's okay, because there are other authorizers in the state.
And
Not
Thank
let
you.
me interrupt at this point, Natalie. We have a couple of other people with questions, and I think the USU folks hear your concern, and it is your concern at this point, not a committee concern. So I think we've explored that. Let me go to Member Booth and then Member Davis. And I, by the way, wanted to conclude this item. We have other items on the agenda, and I wanted to conclude this item in 5 to 7 more minutes. So Member Booth and then Member Davis.
Thank you, Chair Lear. I want to just, from the perspective of one who has spent 44 years in higher education at Brigham Young University, I recognize the great value of public school partnerships with a university setting. And I want to thank Dr. Foss and Dr. Forbush for their interest in and their willingness to share some of that intellectual capital and some of the great research and the great work that they've been doing for many years as partners with USBE in the process of improving the learning of students in charter schools that may eventually go through this process and have the benefit of partnering with USU. And we're definitely grateful for your efforts to, there are so many things that are, so many different kinds of pressures that are coming from a lot of different directions that USBE has to be sensitive to. And you're getting a dose of some of those pressures as you are answering questions and making your presentation this morning. But I want to specifically express our gratitude for the careful work that you have been doing and that you're continuing to do. And we recognize what a valuable asset higher education can be as we partner with public schools and as you partner with USBE in this process of educating Utah's students. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to continuation of this dialogue as we finish up your presentation and are able to take it to the full board in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Booth. Member Davis.
Thank you. I echo that. And I just want you to know, Dr. Forbush and Dean Fossen, that as a former principal, I loved hiring USU graduates. They were rock star teachers, and I have every confidence that USU will be able to work on the learning aspects of authorization and helping with any of our schools, our district schools and our charter schools. I know you do a lot of work in both. So I'm going to finish, and it's going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm going to finish with this last text from our operations monitors, because I think it's really important. And then I have a motion. So what he said is, what we've seen is that authorizers early on didn't spend enough time or thought on the business operations of the schools. Sure, they had them forecast their budgets, but never really looked closely at who would run the operations, how would they do it, and with what systems and resources. And then he goes on to say that he thinks that the state charter school board has a pretty good process in place now for determining the likelihood of success of a charter school from a business administration perspective. That's a lot of the reason why they have denied requests. Now, I know that USU is looking at schools that are already open, but I think the same processes and standards should apply. It may very well be that schools seek a change in an authorizer. They are doing so because the current authorizer is holding them to a high standard. So I think that these are things to keep in mind as USU moves into the authorizing space. And answering some of those operational and business questions and thinking through that and including this with the document. I'm going to move in just a minute to move this on to the full board, so that we don't lose a month in the process. But as part of that motion, I am going to ask that the business and operations piece and criteria be fleshed out a bit more before it comes to the full board. But again, I won't suggest that it come back to committee, but just that it be included before it comes to the full board. And then the final thing, I just want to make note, and maybe folks have already visited with USU about this, but legislation was recently passed when a school closes, that there's going to be this kind of account accrued to help offset some of the finances. So if we really do get in big trouble and a school closes, all of that debt isn't going to come back onto the head of the authorizer. However, at the same time, this account is being accrued, but at the same time, a precedent was also set because the legislature also did pull money from an authorizer when a school closed. And I think it's important that USU has kind of a full understanding of that, and your board of trustees know that as well. Heaven forbid we'd ever get into a problem where there would be more debt or problem than what is going to be in this account that was created by the legislature. But I think just in full understanding as we walk in with our eyes wide open that there's a full understanding of the financial piece. And having said all that, I want you to know we're excited to partner with you. You know, we are asking a lot of hard questions, and man, it may not sound like it, so I really just want to punctuate. We are excited to work with you, and I think we have a great staff, and I think that as we move forward in this space together, that we can partner and help each other along the way and make this really a positive experience for schools and for students. So with that, Chair Lear, if you're okay, or if USU, I don't know if you have any final comments, but I'm ready for a motion, Chair, whenever you are.
I think we'll, unless you have something really pressing, Dr. Foss and Dr. Forbush, I think we can move to a motion.
And I just maybe one really quick statement. Thank you, Board Member Davis, for your very specific feedback. We certainly appreciate that. And I'm likewise very excited about our ability to be a responsible partner with USBE and K-12. And I think one of our hopes through this process of engaging the intellectual capital within the university is that we can actually help add innovative procedures in terms of operations as well as instruction that actually improve the ability of schools to produce the outcomes we all want. So I think that's one of our hopes.
It's a great opportunity. I hope so too. And I appreciate the deep intellectual and academic background that USU brings to this. It's pretty awesome, and it gives us a wonderful opportunity to see how that could create stronger schools. With that, Cindy.
Thank you, Chair. I move that the committee requests that the Utah State University include information on the process USU will use or apply to determine the financial viability of a charter school seeking to transfer to USU as its authorizer, and address, and the business operation models and criteria it will use. And after that inclusion, I recommend that the committee forward to the board to approve the Utah State University's process and approve a request from a school to change authorizers, and recommend that the board approve Utah State University's process to review and approve. Oh my gosh, I'm reading this.
I think you're repeating yourself.
It's so convoluted. I'm wondering if we can streamline it a little bit. I'm gonna shoot from the hip and make my own here. Okay, let me try. I'm gonna take I asked Angie to help me draft the first portion. I move that the committee requests that Utah State University include information on the process it will use or apply to determine the financial viability of a charter school and the business operation aspect of a charter school seeking to transfer to USU as its authorizer. Upon including this information, I move that the committee forward a recommendation to the board to approve Utah State University's process for authorizing transfer requests.
Thank you for that motion. And let me try to repeat it. So the motion is that the committee requests that Utah State University include information on the process USU will use or apply to determine the financial viability of a charter school and the business aspects of that process for a school that is seeking to transfer to USU as its authorizer, and recommend that the board approve Utah State University's process to review and approve a request from a school to change authorizers. I think I got all the important pieces. Is that right? Member Davis, to your motion?
It sounds fabulous.
I think you have the gist of what we'd like to see as it comes back to the board. And so that is the motion. Any further discussion from committee members? Seeing none, will you please vote?
Sorry, Chair Lear, I just have a quick question. I raised my hand. I was a little late.
I am so sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm clear, because I'm happy to support this motion, but if we don't see that other aspect of the process, including operations and business, I can't support that going forward. But I can support this, and I just want to make sure that Vice Chair Davis, that you did include that will be part of the process when the full board reviews it. Is that correct?
May I answer, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yes, that is the intent of the motion, that the business operations piece will be fleshed out more, just like the great academic pieces have been fleshed out.
When
it comes to the full board, and if it's
Right,
not,
that won't come back to us.
it won't come back to us, but the full board will then have a conversation or debate or what have you, and they will either send it back or they'll pass it through once all that's fleshed out.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now with that, can we all vote, please? Committee members, please vote. And I see that all committee members have voted and it is unanimous. So thank you for your patience with our questions, USU folks, and thank you to the committee members for thoughtfully considering these issues. And we will look forward to the information that we see for next month.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we are moving on to a new item, which is action item 1.2, which is a discussion of R277-309, appropriate licensing and assignment of teachers. Mr. Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair Lear. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Staff is requesting some amendments to R277-309. I'm just scrolling them up on the screen for you right now. The primary change is on, we're looking at draft 2, and this starts on lines 91 through 96. What we're trying to do is just clarify that educators with special education classrooms should have the appropriate endorsements for the courses that they're teaching. So that's the first change. The other change, there was one other small change that's on line 113, just clarifying that the responsibility of there falls for the LEA, including charter schools, not just districts. But primary change that we're dealing with is just this recommendation on endorsements for special ed teachers, and Malia Height is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I'm looking if there is a question from Member Davis.
It's a question and a concern. There's really some consternation in the field about requiring special ed teachers, especially, and maybe less so at the high school but level. Even still, it's there, but also at the junior high school level. you know, special education is a shortage area. When I used to coordinate special ed teachers for a large district here in the state, and there was one year I wouldn't have had even a warm body in the classroom had Novell and American Express not laid off that year. And I hired a handful the day before school started because we just don't have enough to fill the jobs. And so what we hear from LEAs is that it's really hard to then say to a special ed teacher, not only is it enough that you have your special education degree, but now you have to go, you have a special educator in a junior high that could be teaching math and language arts. Now you've got to go get a math degree and study trigonometry before you can teach math here in special ed. And now you've got to go and get an English endorsement so you can teach in language arts. And I see Jennifer Thronson's hand up, so I'm hoping she is going to come in and save the day. And I see Malia's hand up, and so I'm hoping they're going to say something that's going to help open my eyes to the beauty of this. And I know where this came from. This is a really hard situation because there is also a feeling that our special educators need to be highly trained so that they are not watering down the content for kids in special ed. If kids in special ed have the ability to go high, that our special educators have the training and the skills to soar with them. And so I get that. We've got these two really sort of difficult competing realities. And so I love seeing your hands. Help me
Okay, please.
know how to respond to the concerns that are coming to me.
Just because she had her hand up first, let's go first to Jennifer Thronson, Dr. Thronson, and then to Dr. Height.
That's the first time that has worked. I will take it. Director Thronson from Teaching and Learning, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. We met with the representatives of the USA, and they had a similar concern until we added the language appropriate for the course.
USA, I'm sorry, let me interrupt you, Jennifer. USA is?
The Utah Superintendents and...
Oh, USSA. I'm
yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Double S. And so they were concerned at first, and then when we talked through it about what it meant, once we added that appropriate for the course, they were okay with it. Because currently in the system, it's about, are you qualified for that course? This was just adding clarity. As a special education teacher, all of these practices were already in place. This was kind of adding clarity that you have to have the appropriate endorsement, just like any teacher, to teach a particular course. And so the opportunity here was just more clarification. And once we added that language, they were like, oh, that they're totally on board, knowing that the issues with shortages and having people qualified. I think another piece that we have coming are these different pathways to earning those endorsements. So not all of these teachers would have to go through the pathways of course taking. They might already have competence in some of these areas, and they can demonstrate that through some of our pathways that allow for micro-credentials and other things to show their qualifications. So with that added flexibility that's on its way, as well as this language update of appropriate for the course, those two in combination, I think, address the very true issues of special education shortages, but don't add any layers that aren't already in the system in terms of how we're funded, is whether they are qualified to teach that course. And so that seemed to jive with the USSA representatives at the meeting.
Cindy, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, but it just doesn't address the concern that the principal brought to me yesterday, that who's also on our board, who's in a tough situation because, you know, at a junior high school, then if you want to have your special ed teacher on the master schedule teach some language arts and some math, that person has to be special ed certified and endorsed in math and endorsed in language arts. But I see Malia shaking her head no. So yay, I'm going to get even more information that's going to be awesome. The other question is, maybe Chair, if you're comfortable with one of our great specialists here answering the question, if a special ed teacher in a secondary school is co-teaching a course in math or language arts or science or history or all four? Does the co-teacher have to have all four endorsements, or can the partner teacher hold the expertise endorsements? I love all the head shaking. So
It gives me great comfort that two such excellent specialists are agreeing with each other. So let's hear first from Malia, and then if she leaves anything unanswered, then we can hear from Dr. Voorhees.
Thank you so much, Chair. Malia Height, Educator Licensing Coordinator. So to clarify your first point, Board Member Davis, the intent of this language is not to say that if you're a special educator, you're going to be teaching language arts with students with disabilities, that you have a language arts endorsement. That's not the intent. It just means that you would have to have the special ed license area and the mild moderate endorsement or the severe education endorsement. So it's the special education endorsement that would allow that educator in a junior high setting or a high school setting to teach a self-contained language arts course in that setting. The mathematics is separate. That's in, if you look at line 95 and 96, the mathematics is there. A lot of that, the reasoning behind that is that our students with disabilities, they need to have the content specialist. And it's exactly what you were saying, that we need them to have the content in order to fly them to the high levels that we know they're capable of reaching. With respect to the co-teaching, the content specialist, the general educator, is the content specialist in that room. The educator as the co-teacher is the one who can provide the specially designed instruction for students with disabilities and IEPs in that classroom. So independent of the content area, if there's a special educator and a content general ed teacher in that classroom, then the special educator does not need any additional endorsements beyond the special education license area with this special education endorsement.
Does that help, Member Davis?
Yes, and I have follow-up, but maybe we could hear also from Dr. Voorhees and then.
Yes, please, Leah, Dr. Voorhees.
Thank you very much, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. So let me also bring some important information into the conversation. 6 years ago, the former State Director of Special Education and I and another former employee did a comprehensive infrastructure analysis and data analysis of all of the outcome data that we had available in special education as a result of a new requirement of the federal government. We spent an entire year, hired a contracted statistician to work with us, analyzing every bit of data that we could get our hands on within special education and across between special education and general education. The biggest, ugliest gap that we found was related to middle school mathematics. And so we did a root cause analysis of why we had that big, ugly gap. And there is a big, ugly gap in middle school mathematics across the nation in general education as well as special education, but Utah's was bigger and uglier. And our root cause analysis demonstrated several findings. One was that students with disabilities were not accessing core content at all. Another was that when they were attempting to access core content, it was not being provided by a content expert. It was not being provided by an educator who had the training to provide the mathematics instruction. Another root cause was that students with disabilities were not actually taking the test. we found pockets all over the state where students with disabilities were taking the language arts test, but not taking the mathematics test. And we found 10,000 of them, actually. And when we looked at the root causes of that, we went back to, found back to the fact that teachers did not feel comfortable having the students take the test. IEP teams didn't feel comfortable having the students take the test because the students were not accessing the content. And so we have very specific data demonstrating that when students with disabilities have access to core content taught by content experts, and then this is the and then is really important. And in addition, have the services and supports outlined on their IEP by the special education expert, and or we found some wonderful data that's been super helpful in intervention, a speech language pathologist, and helping students with disabilities understand the language of mathematics. Students with disabilities are able to master and make progress in and master the content. And we also found all of the data that Malia was just sharing, which she was a part of the research to provide that data about co-teaching. And the fact that when you put students with disabilities in a class with a content expert, a math teacher or a language arts teacher, or in the wonderful data that we have from Juab School District, a science course, and then and also a special education teacher, the outcomes of the students with disabilities increase dramatically, but so do the outcomes of the students without disabilities. Everyone improves. But the key to all of this work, and to be absolutely honest, that infrastructure analysis, data analysis, and root cause analysis was more work than my dissertation. That led us to the root cause that students with disabilities need to have the math instruction from content experts. And so having the teacher have the mathematics endorsement, it makes all the difference.
And Member Davis, is that?
Yes, Chair. May I follow up?
Yes, please.
I'm going to summarize that I think what I'm hearing. So I think what I'm hearing is that if a teacher is, a special ed teacher is teaching in a pull-out setting, a math class in a secondary school, they have to have a math endorsement. I think I'm understanding that. I think I'm hearing that if a special ed teacher is co-teaching in any subject, including math, they don't have to have a math endorsement. Okay. So what I'm hearing from folks who are kind of dealing with this in the job is that they are saying that we are having a difficulty hiring special ed teachers that will teach math because they have to get the math endorsement, and that we're sort of forcing them into an endorsement situation instead of a professional development situation where they can gain skills without feeling, I guess, that pressure of the endorsement. And it stops them from wanting the job. How are we addressing that?
Dr. Height has her hand raised.
Thank you. There are two aspects or two ways that we're addressing that issue. One is that with the new competency-based endorsement that is coming out and available starting in July, it does not require all of the content courses in order to meet the requirements for that endorsement. So they can show their competency of the mathematics in other ways, through micro-credentials, through USBE credit classes. And so there's this alternate pathway. So that's one of the ways that we're attending to it. The other way is really helping the school administrators to see how a co-teaching model can be sustained in their school. All of our data show that the co-teaching model really improves outcomes for all students, as Dr. Voorhees had said. And in fact, for students with disabilities, if they're in a co-teaching classroom rather than a pull-out classroom, they are 11 times more likely to be proficient, which is just insane. So we see the data that really is the model where we can provide students with disabilities the supports that they need from a special educator, as well as the content support that they need from the general educator. This is something that is near and dear to my heart personally, as I am a general education secondary math teacher and also a special educator. And it really is about helping the field understand how they can support a system to provide access to the general education curriculum with the supports and interventions that those students need.
Thank you. That was a very good explanation. Cindy, do you still have questions? Or Leah, did you want to add to that?
Yes, if I may, Chair, I would like to add two ways that we in special education, in addition to the two ways that Malia talked about, are supporting that effort. We are starting a pilot cohort with Salt Lake Community College this summer to help teachers, special education teachers, get the coursework they need for the math endorsement. And we have had for many years and will continue to have a tuition reimbursement program for special educators to take math content courses in order to work on the math endorsement. And so those are in addition to the work that Malia talked about.
Thank you. Member Davis, I want to make sure we've reached the bottom of your concern. And then Mr. Hymas has a question.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have that reimbursement program. I think that is huge. But I guess the question still persists. Would a principal be precluded from hiring a special ed teacher that may need to teach some students? I am a huge proponent of co-teaching. I mean, people think it's brand new or innovative. I was doing it 26 years ago. We co-taught in every single core class: math, language arts, science, and social history. And I have taught from both the general ed, and I have actually taught as a special ed teacher in that co-situation. I am a massive cheerleader. But the question is a principal precluded from hiring, or would a principal hire a special ed teacher like an associate? I mean, even though they're already certified as a special educator, and then once they get the endorsement, they become professional just for that course. How does that pathway look? And then the other thing I've been told is that some people in the field, I guess have an understanding that these folks do need an endorsement in these areas to teach and even to co-teach in math. And so I don't know if communication wise where that breakdown is happening, but there's for some reason an understanding for some out there that those endorsements are required. And I am done. Board Member Hymas has been like patiently waiting with that hand up. I say another word on this issue, like it's over. I'm going to try to say anything on the next issues if possible. Also, taken way too much time this meeting.
And I would like to hear from Dr. Height and then Matt.
Thanks. I think that there certainly is room for increased communication with the field around what is required for co-teaching, and that is something that our office is working on and has actually put up onto our website. What are the specific requirements that I need to have for my license in order to teach this class or to have this assignment? And so that's something that we're working on and improving. When we get to USIMS, that's going to be something that's embedded within the system so that an educator can see every single course that they're qualified to teach, and that they also can say, I want to teach this class. What kind of a license area and or endorsement would I need in order to get that? So that's coming.
That would be super helpful.
Yeah, that is like the goal. That really will be great.
I can see that. And looking at this, and sorry, Matt, as a lawyer, but not the educator, when it says appropriate for the course, that I think that gives administrators the wiggle room they need. And I hope that's what USSA was looking for. Mr. Hymas.
Thank you. And this, I share some concern that Board Member Davis brought up about over complicating the licensing process. We're adding more to an educator's plate, somebody who's trying to get licensed in these fields, and the more we add, the less people want to do it. And now we have principals who are struggling to find individuals. And the frustrating part is we know, I mean, we were, Dr. Voorhees just shared with us the data that says the licensed teacher has a huge effect. And we have several of them in the school that we are not utilizing because they don't have this multiple endorsement in their subject area and their special education. And I still struggle. I've struggled with this for a long time. Why can't the special education teachers and IEP team work with the licensed educator, the professional mathematician, the professional scientist, the professional writer, whatever? Why can't they work together? That helps the principal, that helps the student. I'm missing a piece here. I feel like we're overcomplicating when we have the resources available within our schools. And now we're saying, well, you have to do a little bit more. And it's just overwhelming. The licensing process is already overwhelming to many educators. And now we're adding more. Can we speak to that a little bit?
Dr. Height, would you please do that?
Gladly. So to clarify, the only there's nothing that is substantive in this rule amendment that is going to change our practice. There is no additional endorsement that is required to teach any class that isn't already in place. The only thing that is in place for an additional endorsement for a special educator is if they are the teacher of record for mathematics in a secondary course. That's the only one where they have to have an additional content endorsement. So when we're looking at the complexities or the process of licensing, a special educator who has a special education license with the special education endorsement is qualified to teach all special education courses. However, when they are the content teacher in mathematics, they need to show that they have the content necessary to teach the mathematics. And that's the difference. There certainly are ways to work with the general educator. As a general ed math teacher, I had lots and lots of students with disabilities in my classroom in a non-co-teaching setting. And I worked very closely with the special educator and IEP team to ensure that my students with disabilities had the appropriate access to the general education curriculum. The key with special education is that the special educator is not responsible for providing the general education content. They are required to provide the specially designed instruction that gives those students access to the general education curriculum. They're not the content experts. They are the support experts. And the general education experts are the content experts. And so that is something that's really critical, and we need to help our schools and help our LEAs and administrators find ways to support these students with their special educator who can provide the specially designed instruction, but also help them to gain access to the general education curriculum, which is where that content is really critical.
So Matt, are you hearing what you need to hear about competency that might address your concerns?
That is a great question.
I think I am. I think I'm hearing that there is now, or there will be in July, a competency-based way for your professional experts to be endorsed to satisfy the requirements of licensing. Is that what you're saying, Malia?
Yeah, and there's certainly, and goes back to a question that Board Member Davis posed earlier, is that they certainly can meet the minimum requirements to qualify for an associate endorsement, which would give them 3 years to complete all of the competencies for the professional level endorsement in the special education mathematics area.
I hear you. I want to make sure we reach this, we've satisfied Matt to the extent
Well,
possible.
I don't know if I'll ever be satisfied, Chair Lear, but that's beside the point. But let me just bring up one more thought. It does say, I know that as we're reading lines 94, 93 through 96, and they have the changes, it was mentioned that the intent of the language is, and I don't know if the intent of the language matches the language. And Dr. Haidt, I guess I would kind of call you out as the individual who said that. The intent of the language is, so you have a different understanding than what we had when we first read these lines, right? And so how do we clarify that so that we all have the same intent of the language by reading the language?
I so agree with that. I am not a fan of intent. I'd rather the language say what we meant to say. So we're putting you on the spot, Malia, perhaps, or Leah.
Well, I wonder if just adding in line 94 prior to the word endorsement, it says appropriate special education endorsement, so that we clarify that it's a special education endorsement that's required to teach the course for special education for students with disabilities. I think we cover the mathematics in lines 95 and 96 around parent B.
So
am I looking at a different, I'm looking at a draft 2, I'm sorry, am I?
I think this is draft.
Oh, draft 2. I don't have draft 2 up. Let me pull draft 2 up.
I can't see the top of this, so I only have the one screen today. Draft 2, yes.
That is draft 2, yes, on screen.
Okay, let me pull up.
Maybe I'm looking at draft 1. I mean,
in 94, so instead of and endorsement and special education endorsement,
I'm trying not to waste time, but I also want you to be able to process this. Other questions, Member Davis?
I should never say never. I should never say I'm not going to say one more other word.
I've learned that lesson. I'm older than you are.
I'm really sorry. What we need to have clarified in 94 is that it only refers to the special ed certification. We don't need license and endorsement. And what we need is what is the license? Is it mild, moderate? Is it severe, profound? How many options are there under special ed? And then we need to clarify in the next part when it says the secondary mathematics for students with disabilities, we need to somehow clarify that it's an outlier when a special ed teacher teaches a pull-out math class with only students with disabilities, that is the only time an endorsement is required in mathematics.
Is that accurate? And Malia, Leah, is that accurate? And or do you have language to say that?
It certainly is accurate. I think that maybe one of the things that we need to address to add clarity is to include the co-teaching class.
Is this, how urgent is this, Malia and or Leah? Is this something that we can try again? I don't want us to have to painfully discuss this again next month, but I also think this is an important area of concern in the field, so I would like to get it right. And I, like Mr. Hymas, would appreciate the words to be right and not have to imply too much from the words. So what's your urgency level?
I don't have an urgency. Dr. Voorhees, I know this is relevant to the special education rules. I don't know where those are in the process of revision approval. This is one of the reasons that we had to add the endorsement, is that it was unclear in the rule that if someone had a license in education, in special education, but not an endorsement in a special education, they wouldn't be qualified.
And there would be some reimbursement problems. So Leah, can you speak please to the?
Yeah, it could certainly wait. I think it can wait a month, but if the question that Vice Chair Davis brought up and that Malia responded to is related to that term teacher of record and a lack of understanding and clarity about what teacher of record is when it comes to a co-teaching class. Maybe if we simply added the word sole, if you're the sole teacher of record, because in a co-teaching class, you don't need the endorsement, as Malia has outlined and Vice Chair Davis has reiterated. So it only applies if you're the only math teacher and the teacher of record for students with disabilities in secondary math, you need the endorsement. Does that make it more clear?
It does to me. I'm not an expert in the field. Let's hear Jennifer and then Matt again.
Yes, I think my only hesitation with that, Leah, and help me think through it, is, and the committee, of course, if we call it sole and now I have two teachers, do they both not have to be qualified because they're not the sole teacher? I don't know. I think our system in terms of like Cactus prevents that, but it could be viewed as, oh, if there's only one teacher in the room, they have to have a math endorsement. But if there's two, neither of them has to have the math endorsement.
That doesn't make sense. Matt?
Yeah, if we're speaking specifically to math, do we need line 94? We just added to it a little bit.
Malia?
Yeah, so I think the problem with adding just severe, profound, we need to have something that says you have to have a license area and an endorsement to be qualified to teach. That's one of the critical things that we need to have. there are more than just 2 special education endorsements. There are, I think, 6 or 8, I can't remember, which is why we say appropriate for the course. Maybe adding a definition for what a teacher of record is.
Well,
in
great.
section.
Follow up, Chair there.
Yes, please go ahead.
I get, so we're saying, but you're saying if you have a special education license, you can teach anything except for math. Is that true? So why need a special education license with a concentration?
So and we're going to get to a lot of this fun stuff next week in our special session.
Okay.
But a special education license there's a license area, and then on top of the license area is the endorsement. And if you have just the license area, perhaps you have a license that you came from Florida, and so you have a special education license. And so now in the state of Utah, you have a professional special education license, but you have not yet met the Utah requirements for a mild, moderate endorsement or a severe special education endorsement. And so we grant the associate endorsement, which is only valid for 3 years. But then after 3 years, say they don't do anything and they don't complete the requirements, they still have that license, but they no longer have an endorsement. And so we have to show that they have met all of the requirements, not just some of them. And so that's why it's important to have the license area and the endorsement for the special education.
Thank you.
And Cindy.
I think the word endorsement is confusing and the word appropriate for the course is confusing. So for example, if you go through school in Utah, are you saying that the student has to get a license, a general license in special ed, and on your diploma or license that we get through the state, it would say licensed in special ed, endorsed to teach mild, moderate, or a deaf and blind sounds like is a new area of endorsement, or these, do we use that language? I think that's what's confusing, because on the one hand, we're saying you only need an endorsement to teach math. And then on the other hand, we're saying actually inside of special education, these sort of endorsed areas are part of the license. Do we have separate programs, for example, that these special ed teachers now have to go through different endorsement programs to be able to teach school at the School for the Deaf and Blind, or mild, moderate, or severe profound?
Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
So when somebody completes a program within a university in Utah, they complete a preparation program that upon completion, they receive the special education license area and a special education endorsement. Typically, that's the mild, moderate, or the severe endorsement. We do have some others, deaf, blind, visually impaired, but when someone completes a program, they get the license area and the endorsement. It's part of one program. So it's not an additional barrier or something else they have to do. When they graduate, that's what they get.
Can I follow up, Chair?
Well, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Would the clarification in line 94 still be appropriate for the course or appropriate for the student, with a parenthetical clause with the special ed endorsements listed, and then in the next line be specific about this next part is talking about content. It's talking about math only, and only for a teacher that's not co-teaching, and give all those specifics in there. Because I think the two are being conflated right now.
I can see that. Do you see that, Malia? Or Leah? I am torn. I want this, I don't want to be rehashing this another month, but I also want to be correct and accurate, and also acknowledge that there's a concern about special education teacher shortages, and especially math. So I'm looking for a suggestion. If the committee, I guess here's what I'm going to propose without opposition or without anybody's objection. I'd like to suggest we table this and have further discussion and bring this back next month. Does anyone object to that suggestion? I see no hands. I think it is worth finding language that works for both math, special ed, and for special ed generally. So that's, without objection, we'll say this is tabled and we will bring it back next month. Does that require a vote, Angie?
I think the motion might be to move on to the next agenda item, and it might be a good idea to do that. As the chair, you probably could do it as well, but I think the procedure would be to just vote
I appreciate
the
that.
next agenda
Thank you.
item.
So I move that we move on to the next item. Would committee members please vote? And I see 5 votes. Thank you very much. And thank you very, very much for this rather tedious and complicated discussion. I think that, and the specialists have been extremely helpful. And Matt, I especially appreciate your expertise as a principal who's solving this on the ground. So thank you very much. With that, we will continue work on this and move on to the next item, which is item number 1.3, incentives for national board certification. It's an amendment, Mr. Rasmussen.
Yeah, hopefully this one will be a little bit easier. There's one simple change being proposed to this rule, and that is to extend the deadline for applicants to apply for their grant for national board certification. You can see that change on lines 69 and 70 on your screen. Staff recommends that we extend the deadline from December 1st to January 31st. This will give the applicants more time to complete their projects and do the requirements for that. Erica Horsley and Jennifer Thronson are available if you have any questions on that proposal.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee members? I see none. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Please go ahead, Mr. Hymas.
I make a motion that the committee approve R277-317 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion is the committee approve R277-317 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any further discussion? I see none. Please vote. And it's a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Thanks for that uncomplicated item. Item 1.4. This is an action item on R277-320, Grow Your Own Teacher and School Counselor Pipeline Program, which is a new rule. And I think we are on, despite my my page, I think we're on draft 3. We want to be looking at draft 3, which came in the last couple of days. And I will turn to, again, Ben Rasmussen to further explain this.
Thank you, Chair. So R277-320 is a proposed rule to implement HB 381, which was passed in this legislative session. It provides scholarships for LEAs to basically grow their own counselors and teachers through their paraprofessionals and some of their staff that may be eligible to move up in the ranks for that. We are proposing that the committee approve draft 3. This has incorporated some feedback that we received both from Member Lear as well as also for Chair Lear, as well as also from USSA. We have Kim Herrera and Lisa McLaughlin, who will be the specialists implementing this rule to answer questions, as well as Jennifer Thronson, who is heavily involved in the negotiations.
Let's see if there are any questions before we hear from additional specialists. I'm not seeing any board member questions. I received notice that I think Parker Fossen came back, Dr. Fossen, who was with us this earlier, I don't know if he had any, if he wanted to make a comment, or, and I'm not seeing anything.
I'm not seeing him back on right now.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. I have a couple of questions. I was looking for other committee members, but I have a couple of questions still on this rule. I want to first state that I do appreciate staff working with me in the last couple of days, and I'm sorry it was so late, to add some level of documentation and what I feel is responsibility to this program. I understand that it was the sponsors of the bill's desire that there be a minimum of red tape and bureaucracy, and I very much appreciate that. But I also have been working with the USBE long enough and in various roles that I know that sometimes there can be schizophrenia, not to misuse that phrase or use it lightly, but there can be mixed feelings about documentation. It doesn't, sometimes it's not required at the beginning, and at the end, suddenly we want to know where all our money went. And this is a $9 million program. So I think it is important that there be some information if the USBE has to report on this. So I appreciate that the staff was responsive in adding some of that clarification. I have two questions that I still have after my back and forth with staff. One of them is on line 130, or line 30, sorry. Ben, if you'll move up to that, or whoever's driving. Where, and it could be, yes. Well, starting on line, to get the context, let's go up a little farther, up a little higher to the beginning of that. So we're looking to have a qualified mentor teacher to work with these individuals. And one of the criteria is on parentheses, has successful teacher, school counselor changed to effective or highly effective evaluations in accordance with R2775 through 33. The evaluation system only applies to school districts. It doesn't apply to charter schools. It's one of the areas from which charter schools are exempt. Matt probably knows that because he doesn't have to evaluate his teachers in the same way that traditional schools do. I'm concerned that we have 41 school districts and 120 plus charter schools, and they are unable to comply with this. I wondered if anybody had a suggestion so that there's some criteria for effectiveness for a mentor teacher. I'm not seeing any responses. Jennifer, I don't want to put anybody on the hot seat. I know that this is, I raised this earlier, but I think it probably got lost in other issues. No thoughts about that. I'll give you a minute to think about that. Let me do my second question, and then I'll come to you, Member Booth. I'm still unclear who is responsible to maintain documentation. The bill says, the bill, House Bill 381, I think it's a House bill, says that the money will be paid to the LEA, but that costs for tuition, books, fees, and I think there was one other element that could be paid with this money. It seems to me that that somebody should retain documentation of those payments being made. If maybe I overlooked it, I don't know if it should be the LEA shall maintain that documentation, the individual it's benefiting should maintain that documentation, but I think it needs to be clear. And there's one about the efforts to maximize financial opportunities, but I'm still not clear who's responsible for that documentation. So those are my two questions that still remain, and I'll let you process those and we'll go to member booth.
So Chair Lear, as you're asking these two questions, I'm in awe because I read the proposed rule before we had our meeting together, our planning meeting, and then you said you were going to read it more carefully that afternoon, and then I started seeing all of the back and forth going on after your reading of it, and the clarity with which, I'm just concerned about our future. What do we do when Carol Lear is not? Because I read through all of these things and I didn't catch a one of them. But and the two that you're bringing up right now are also so valid and are a concern. How do we train ourselves? I mean, thank goodness we've got a lot of staff, very capable staff, and a lot of different perspectives from the board feeding into this. But this is a scary proposition to come up with board rule that is complete and deals with each of the elements in the manner that you have dealt with them in the revisions and the recommendations that have come into this document since just a couple of days ago. So I'm grateful for the process, but I'm sad that I can't contribute a great deal because I don't have any experience in some of the concerns that you're bringing. Like when you just said a moment ago, charters don't evaluate like traditional schools evaluate. I didn't know that. Thank goodness we have those that have been around the block a couple of times on the board, so us new guys have a chance of learning and trying quick to get up to speed. But I'm concerned that in the meantime, we may let some things pass by that should not make it through the gate because we're not up to speed on what's really critical in order for things to run smoothly.
Chair, I can't raise my hand, but can I point one thing out?
Yes, I'd appreciate that, Ben.
So I've just put the applicable provision of R277533 on the screen. Charter schools are required to comply with some limited components of that, and that includes providing the evaluation to the board with on the highly effective scale. If you look here in 533.6, those have to be recorded, and charter schools are required to comply with this 533.6.2 as part of the rule.
Hang on just a second. Let me just, because I thank you. I thought there was some requirement that there be some evaluations by charter schools, but I didn't know.
So it's at the very end of the rule there where charter schools.
So 6.2, can you scroll back up to 6? And then we can look at 2 and see if that satisfies. A school district should report summative scores annually for all educators using, so charters have to use some version then of our evaluation of the traditional school evaluation system. Is that how you're saying you read that, Ben?
Yes, that would be, I think.
And then can you scroll up to 9 and let's see what 9 says? So the data have to be reported by both charters and school districts. That is really helpful, and I'm sorry I missed those. I missed those. I would ask that we reference maybe a little more specifically and I know you referenced the rule. Can you switch? I'm asking for a lot of technology flexibility here. Can we go back and see exactly what it says and see if I feel better about
Line 30.
yes. Matt, can I put you on the spot and say and ask you, because you are with a sophisticated charter school at the secondary level, how do you evaluate your educators?
Are you speaking to like a year-end evaluation?
Yeah, there's summative or there's formative requirements too, but like a summative evaluation, what do you use?
Well, we use just observations. I'm trying to think because there's.
What I'm asking is if you do something formal as an evaluation with your teachers.
I'm not, because of the unique team that I work with. I personally haven't done those things. I know that there is a process
That your school uses. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, that helps. Okay, that answers that question. And Randy, I should say you're very kind, and I appreciate the compliment. But I obviously missed this one in terms of the details. So, so thank you for all the staff that didn't miss this. So, and that is an answer to one of my questions. I guess I wish I had more information about the general charter school understanding of this requirement, because it would make me feel better that there was an effective, there was a sort of an evaluation that is commonly used, at least part of the evaluation by charter schools. Malia, can you speak to that? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, happy to. The charter, all LEAs are required to submit these evaluations, and they're housed in our CAPTUS system. And so whatever the individual LEA determines to be their evaluation tool is up to the LEA at the charter level. The districts have something a little more prescriptive, as you see in 533, but they are doing some sort of a summative assessment and reporting those evaluations to USBE.
That is encouraging. Member Davis.
Thanks. I have to apologize because I may have missed something too, but was there anything in code on this, or did I miss this in the rule? I did a very quick cursory read, I will admit. What's the accountability for the money received for the degree? Is there a certain number of years that are required to teach after that, or was there nothing in the code or rule that said you get reimbursed if you actually complete the degree, or is this just we're going to pay the money as they go, and if you drop out junior year, we're out our money?
And you mirror my questions. And Jennifer, I already warned Jennifer that I would ask her about this, so we'll let her speak to that. Dr. Thronson.
Yes, absolutely. So the question around, is there an incentive or a consequence of completion? There is not. We talked with Representative Moss and Senator Milner, who were the sponsors for this bill. We gave them a couple options. One of an incentive that if you stayed for 3 years, you would earn a certain stipend every year of those 3 years. We also talked about consequences similar to the PJEP program that we had. Like if you don't stay, you have to pay back a portion of your tuition and fees and all of that. They did not want to get into that. It would require a full-time FTE at the USBE to be able to monitor and track that over time. We basically become credit collectors at some level. And so they didn't have any interest in either a carrot or a stick related to this. We will track that data in terms of when we report in a couple of years on this pilot program, how many are not completing and what those dollars equate to related to those that don't complete. But the success that we've seen in the LEAs I think, as they reached out to districts that already have processes like this in place, because you're not just taking anybody, you're taking people who have demonstrated success, who have shown that they really would be ready to be a teacher, that these are people in your system already. The likelihood of that is greatly reduced, not zilch, but it is greatly reduced. And so their concern over, kind of thinking about the complexities and the way of tracking that, they decided not to put any of that into place.
Follow up, Chair.
Yes, please.
I guess that is the difference from this program we had in the past, because I think we did lose quite a bit of money in the past when we had that program, and then some were dropping out or not fulfilling teaching assignments. And so I would hate for this to mirror that without any of these stipulations. But if I remember correctly in code, this was one-time money, not ongoing, correct? And maybe with those differences, with the teacher already showing there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So let's hope that those differences will be enough to make this really great and successful, and that we won't lose a significant portion of these dollars.
Thank you. Jennifer, did you have something to add still?
She's absolutely correct. I think we're at that place where the sponsors have asked us not to put those in place, and so we as staff didn't add something in the rule. To go back to your question on kind of fiscal responsibility, our intentions, and the reason it's not explicitly in here, is because it's covered in our 277-113 that they are required to be fiscally responsible, have procedures in place for collecting the data required for monitoring and auditing related to their fiscal expenditures for any program. We could reference that in here, but truly we were leaning on that this is required no matter what program you have, that you have the documentation to back up your expenditures, and didn't feel the need to clearly articulate that here. But if that would help to ease concerns, we can easily reference 113 in the rule.
So your point is that seems to be saying that the LEA is responsible for tracking the expenditures, not the applicant, not the superintendent. There's one place where the applicant would have to show that she had maximized her financial aid opportunities, but other than that, it would be the LEA's responsibility. I would appreciate a statement to that effect that referenced 113, even if it said something like, and I don't know if you can scroll up and down, Ben, and if we can find a section, because I think it would be a simple amendment if I can find an appropriate section.
Chair, could we add just on line 75, the superintendent shall monitor LEA expenditures of program funds consistent with Rule R277-113?
Well, yes, but I'd like to add in the superintendent may monitor them, but I'd also like to add, and the LEAs, the superintendent shall monitor, and LEAs shall maintain a record of expenditure of program funds consistent with. How would that be?
I think that's doable.
It's a little compound, but let me say that again. The superintendent shall monitor, and LEAs shall maintain expenditures of program funds consistent with R277-113. That makes me feel much better, and I'm glad you pointed out R277. Yes.
One way you might want to, this is Angie Stallings, by the way. One way you might want to handle it is, I was noticing you have the LEA applicant shall provide documentation in 771. What you could do is an LEA applicant shall, and then make the B, provide documentation maintain and provide documentation described in subsection 7, something like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's you've kind of separated the superintendent's duties and have the LEA's duties in 5, but that's just an idea of a way to draft the amendment a little differently. I don't know.
That would be fine too. And I see your point, and I think that might be easier for LEAs. And that we do want the LEA, the applicant is responsible for documentation of efforts to maximize financial aid opportunities, but the LEA is responsible for maintaining documentation consistent with 113. Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, I think what the amendment would say is the LEA shall provide or maintain the documentation necessary for the superintendent to monitor, what you just said in subsection.
I'm fine about that. I'm fine. I just would like it stated somewhere expressly, even though it's a reference to another rule, that the LEA has to maintain that documentation, and maybe something that the bill sponsors are not concerned about. But I am concerned, as we had a discussion yesterday in board meeting, that this is a lot of money. That we had a similar discussion about $300,000. For me, $9 million is real money, and I feel like we need to be clear about who's responsible, even again if it's a reference to another rule. So I don't know if you can.
How you were suggesting on screen.
Shall monitor, and LEA shall. We got to have some verb in there for the LEAs.
So
Shall
look
maintain.
at line 80.
And then, yes, I see what you're saying. Yes, that works for me. And do you want to repeat consistent with R277?
Well, I think that's included already in subsection 7, but I can repeat it again if you'd like.
I would like you to, just so that LEAs can see that this is really primarily the superintendent complying with R277-113 subject there, and this is the LEAs complying with R277-113. I appreciate the legislators' efforts to keep this bureaucracy to a minimum, but I do have experience with the mothership of this kind of a program, which was the PJEP program. And yes, it became a nightmare of collections, but it also represented a huge drain of funds for because of well-meaning teachers who started a program and then their husband moved to South Carolina, or they started a program and somebody got very ill, and it was just it was really a tragedy when that money is so valuable. So I think that some concern is warranted. Jennifer, did you have something else?
Just one technical edit. So on 75, it's, oh, he did it. We're good.
Okay.
Shall had and. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. I'm seeing, those were my two concerns. Cindy, did you have, I sort of think I hijacked your concern. Cindy?
No, I'm
Okay.
thank you.
I appreciate you being patient. I personally want to say publicly, I feel like there should be some more. I wish there was a little more strength in the mentoring requirement, and I also want to say I find it. I'm a little troubled that a person could mentor 5 people. That seems to be something that we haven't had great success with before, that it's hard for a good teacher to mentor one person successfully. Jennifer convinced me there are various constructs in different LEAs that might make that possible. But I still wish there were a few more documentation requirements in this bill because it's so much money. So I just want to say that, but I am very appreciative of the changes that have been made. I see Matt Hymas with a comment, and also Natalie Klein. Matt.
Yeah, I had the same question. That was of all of this, I mean, many questions, but when I saw that the one mentor could help 5 candidates, how effective, and I know you said that Carol or Chair Lear, you had your questions answered. Could you share that with all of us? Because again, I don't know how effective one teacher could be in mentoring 5 other teachers, especially with the workload that is on a teacher. It just seems a bit overwhelming to me, but if you have a great answer, I'd love to hear it.
I will defer to Jennifer. It's not, and no offense, Jennifer, it's not a great answer, but it was an answer. So Jennifer, you have to speak to that, please.
Absolutely. It's a good enough answer, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Basically, we have LEAs such as Duchesne. They have 2 new teacher mentors that are full-time mentors. And so those particular roles may be able to take on 5. I think a lot of our LEAs are understanding that as a classroom teacher, taking on 5 by themselves is impossible. I served as an instructional coach, and I was the mentor for teachers, and I had 5, and it was doable in that role. So it just depends on what the relationship of the mentor is to the mentee, whether they might be able to handle more than 1. I think you absolutely agree that more than maybe 1 or 2 for a full-time classroom teacher wouldn't be a responsible decision, but not all of our structures are exactly that same scenario. So this just allows that latitude to have a little flexibility at the local level to attend to the different models that we see in the districts and charters.
Follow up, Chair.
Please.
How confident are we? I mean, there's 2 sides to this, right? How confident are we that the mentee will come out with the appropriate knowledge that they need, right? You see what I'm saying? Like now I'm looking at the other side. And if I'm one of 5 that's being mentored by a single teacher, and I'm like, man, I look at somebody who had one-on-one or even 1 to 2 attention, am I cheated?
That was my concern.
Yeah, may I answer?
Would you like to speak?
Thank you.
To
So
that?
I think with the qualifications and eligibility requirements we put into this rule, we are creating a standard of mentors that we don't have in this state. So currently, when we assign a student teacher to a mentor, that is a very variable process in our state. We actually have a group that's working on this. We called around, asked LEAs, how do you place student teachers? And their practice is the school secretary might say, oh, this teacher could use help, or the principal might say, oh, this teacher hasn't had a student teacher in a few years, let's give them to them. The way that we're placing student teachers in typical practice doesn't address how we're requiring them to be placed in this practice. So we are putting them with highly qualified educators who are demonstrating proficiency, student growth, or elements in the counseling space of like success. We should have better outcomes, whether it's 1 or 5, again, depending on the amount of bandwidth our teachers and mentors that are actually in the job of a mentor have. You've got experts in this space because of those eligibility requirements. My confidence in our relationships for mentees and mentors, given what's in this rule, is much stronger than our current practice for every other student teacher in the state.
That's helpful information, Matt.
Yeah, that is helpful. And then I know that money is always a sensitive subject, but if I'm a mentor teaching or mentoring 5 candidates, $1,000 doesn't go a long way. Is that $1,000 per, or is that 1,000 overall?
May I answer?
Yes, please.
It's overall. We actually had to push the sponsors pretty hard to get any stipends. As you all know, in the regular district charter space, many mentors don't get paid anything for the service they provide. So we wanted to encourage some financial support for our mentors to recognize what they are doing for the mentees. And that was kind of the best that we could land on with the sponsors. So I appreciate where you're coming from and would agree. We were happy to get something at the end of the day.
And really the USBE has no role in this. I mean, that an LEA could assign routinely to give somebody something of an incentive, could say, well, you've got to take on 5 people. And some teachers are desperate enough to say, sure, for $1,000, I'll do that, which makes me a little concerned. One more quick question, and then Natalie, I'll come to you. Did you just pull 5 to 1 out of the hat, or did you have any data or reason to use those numbers? Jennifer?
Sorry, I'm getting a text about the rule. Go ahead again.
Okay. No, I said, did you just pull the number 5 out of the hat, 5 to 1, or did you say, oh, that seems about right? Or is there any data about that?
It's unfortunately not data driven. It was what would the sponsors kind of agree to, and that's where they felt okay. We tried to get like 1,500 for that higher end, and the most they were willing was 1,000, and then we just scaled it down from there, trying to leave it pretty hefty, even if you only have 1 or 2. And that's where you'll see the 500 to 1,000 kind of strategy.
Right. If it were up to me, I'd almost want the numbers reversed, so that you'd have some quality control. Natalie, thank you, Jennifer. Natalie.
Sure. I had a question about that as well. On the 5 candidates, it actually says 5 candidates or more. Is there a maximum that they can take on?
Jennifer.
We're worried about them even being able to handle 5.
Yeah,
Maybe or more should be removed.
That might be a good change. I think more than 5, honestly, for anyone would be a lot. So if we could go to that section, I think
I would agree. Could we delete
68?
Yes, line 68. Could we, for mentors serving 5 candidates, could we delete that or more? Without objection, we'll have to prove the rule as amended anyway, but thank you very much.
Okay, and then I just have one other minor fix that needs to be done, just technical on page or on line 37. It says and it should just be a after the change was made. The and didn't get fixed to at the end of the line on 37.
Yeah, I caught a bunch of those too. Thank you. Just a
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Cindy, did you have other questions, comments?
Yeah, I'm really sorry if we covered this already. Just so I understand, so is the person, these people started as like an aide in the classroom. Now they've been given a scholarship, they are going to get a bachelor's degree, or they're a teacher that's going to get a counseling degree. So let's say they're getting the bachelor's degree to become a teacher. Is the understanding that they're going to continue working as an aide, or is the understanding that, because they can't be hired on an associate license because they don't have a bachelor's degree? But then, so is there some kind of explicit understanding that they're guaranteed an internship in lieu of a student teaching, or does their aide job, how does that work? Is that defined anywhere in all of this?
That's a really good question. I was so focused on the detail, I didn't see that bigger picture. Jennifer, please.
Yes, absolutely. So for this particular model, for the paraprofessionals, when they're doing their schooling, like their traditional course taking, they're staying in the role of the paraprofessional. When they get to their student teaching experience, they are then eligible to be paid up to a half-time FTE for that student teaching semester, which is really a full-time FTE because it's semester-based, to be able to be paid as a student teacher, or as you're probably more, some of the LEAs call it an intern, when they're actually paying them. So it's allowing them to continue to make wages that they would have lost out on in typical models because they wouldn't be able to serve as a paraprofessional while doing their student teaching. So this bill allows them to get paid while they're doing their student teaching, so they don't lose wages that typically they would have lost as a paraprofessional.
Chair, may I follow up?
Yes.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So they, in addition to receiving the scholarship money, they're going to continue to be paid for 1 semester their salary money, or if they are selected to do an internship in lieu of student teaching, then they will get that half salary for the full year internship, which will also give them their student teaching credit, and they'll be paid by the district to do the half-year internship and not by the scholarship.
Yeah, so the scholarship is just for the coursework. The additional dollars in this bill afford for us to pay for FTE. So in this case, the LEA is responsible for 0.15 if they choose to pay for the student teaching, and then the state funds would cover up to 0.35. The LEA is also responsible for all benefits across the halftime FTE. So we're paying 0.35, but it is salary only, and they would be responsible for the benefits related to that halftime FTE.
Last follow-up, regardless if it's student teaching for a semester or internship for a full year, some of that money comes out of the scholarship.
We would just pay for a semester only, but they could maximize that semester. If they choose to do a year long, we've had this conversation with the sponsors. That's up to them, but there are programs that only have a semester, so they would just pay for that semester for teachers.
Right, one university just does a semester if they do an internship, but okay, is that fleshed out anywhere? Like all of that understanding? Did I miss that in there? Is that
in the bill? Some of it's in the bill. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yeah, it's in the bill, and we've had meetings for people to learn about this program, and we have an application drafted that we're waiting for the rule to kind of pass to be able to release. Those questions of clarity, we've been able to kind of help along the way with talking with the LEAs. I'm not sure how you articulate programmatic other than the funding mechanism, because it really is tied to the funding that you see in the rule. So we could do that. I will say this is one that if we can't get through committee today, it really will impact the LEAs in applying, because we don't want to release an application that doesn't mirror what's in the rule, and that would delay us another month if that's the case. So just keep that in mind as we kind of make tweaks. We've been able to articulate a lot of this to the field through our informational meetings and things along the way.
Chair, just my last, I'm fine with that, as long as it is articulated in the application, so there's a very clear understanding. And then I'm just going to put a plug in that we get the documentation we need, but making the application as least onerous as possible. That sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but just whatever we can do to get what we absolutely have to have, and then nothing more.
And I'm always wary of applications that substitute for rules. So I would ask you to be really careful in the application that you stick to the rules. And if we need additional changes in the rule, as cumbersome and frustrating as that is, I would ask you to come back so that the application doesn't take on life of its own, which I've seen. And then I would really implore you to maintain, I know this is contrary to other bills that passed, but I really want to see that this money was well used. And I do have PTSD from PJAP. I admit it, that's a bunch of acronyms, but I do. And I really, I'm concerned that this $9 million is real money that could have enriched the WPU. So but yet the idea is one I totally support. And I love that it sends people to true training and legitimate training. I'm a bit conflicted like Cindy. So thank you. Thanks for all your patience in the discussion. Is anyone willing to make a motion? It would be draft 3 as amended.
I will, Chair Lear.
Thank you.
I move that the committee approve R277-320 draft 3 and as amended and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Booth. The motion is that the committee approve R277-320 draft 3 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion? I see none. Please vote. And I see 3 votes, 4 votes. I'm not seeing. Matt, are you going to vote? Did you vote? And I didn't see it.
I did vote. I voted yes.
Good. I think that everyone voted and everyone voted yes, as I saw those. I should count to 5 more easily than the board chair can count to 15. We are, as Deputy Superintendent Stallings mentioned, getting short on time. And so I'd like to take one more item. And who knew that we would be apologizing for our swift committee meetings before, and now we're running behind. But I'd like to take one more item, and then we'll talk about USEEP the next month. It'll be on our agenda again, because as Deputy Stallings pointed out, that may also engender some discussion. So let's move to the next item on the agenda, item 1.5, which is an action item R277-923. And I'm not sure if Jeff Van Holten is on or if it would be Ben Rasmussen.
I am here, Chair Lear.
Oh, please. Welcome. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. R277-923 has turned 5 years old. And for board members who are new to the board, in case you are not aware, when an administrative rule turns 5, we have the option to continue it or get rid of it. And if you do nothing, the Office of Administrative Rules will just delete it. So every 5 years, we are required to make sure we want to keep a rule. So this rule is very simple. No changes are being made. The legislature actually just provided additional funding to this program. It's no longer a pilot. So the word pilot was taken out previously, and we just need to continue the rule. That is it. And we've got staff on hand if you have any questions about the program itself.
And thank you very much for that, Jeff. Any questions by board members, of staff members? I think this is one that speaks for itself. I know the individuals who are involved with this and have great respect for their the information they add and contribute to the USBE. Seeing no questions, I'll accept a motion. Member Davis, or is that a question?
I move that the committee approve the continuation of R277-923 and forward to the board for approval on final reading.
The motion is the committee approve the continuation of R277-923 and forward to the board for approval on final reading. Any final discussion or further discussion to that motion? I see none. Will committee members please vote? And I'm counting 5 votes, including mine right now. Thank you very much. That passed unanimously. And I am trying to text at the same time with Deputy Superintendent Stallings about our last item on the agenda, and we have a few minutes. So Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you please speak your thoughts on the last item on the agenda?
Sure, Chair Lear. So what I was mentioning is we have a little bit over 10 minutes left in the committee meeting. And this item, the UC recommendations and barriers, it may require more than 10 minutes of time. So the question is whether the committee would like to bring this back to next month or start the discussion today with the expectation of continuing the discussion next month, or whether the committee feels comfortable making a motion. So just making, giving that kind of background. I know that we do have one member of the public who joined us to provide public comment on this. You could also take his public comment and have Assistant Superintendent Voorhees give a little background and then continue the discussion next month. So those are some options for the committee.
Thank you. And I think I'll take the chair's prerogative and say, let's get started. So, but I'd like to hear Leah's explanation first, and then Mr. Phelps, thank you for joining us, and we'll take his public comment immediately after Dr. Voorhees' introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. So you may remember that you as the full board accepted this memorandum from the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel several months ago for consideration. So the Standards and Assessment Committee did review it. before the new year. It went to the full board. It was accepted for consideration by the full board at the beginning of the year. So you have already seen it one time before. And board leadership requested that it come to you as Law and Licensing Committee to now consider it, since you accepted it for consideration, to consider the actual solutions in the memo for adoption, to possibly direct staff to implement. And so that's why the memo has returned and is on your agenda. So the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel, which, as you know, is one of your appointed advisory groups, they submitted this memo for your consideration before the new year. So that's the background to this agenda item.
And can you just speak to the substance of that, Leah, just briefly, and maybe less than maybe 3-ish minutes?
I'd be happy to. So at the beginning of the school year, the advisory panel did an activity to determine 4 priorities for their consideration for the year. Priorities in special education, in which they would review data, they would review infrastructure, and then they would make recommendations to you as the board. One of the priorities that they chose was systemic changes for the state of Utah that would support meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities. And inclusion is to the maximum extent appropriate per each individual student's IEP team receiving their services and supports in as close proximity as possible to general education peers. And so this memorandum with its 4 recommendations is talking about the barriers that the panel has seen. And if you remember, the barrier includes parents of individuals with disabilities, general education teachers, special education teachers, general education or administrators, excuse me, and then other agency stakeholders like DCFS, JJS, university, educator preparation, professors. So the panel has a wide stakeholder group. So they identified 4 particular barriers for students with disabilities to be meaningfully included, which doesn't mean that they just sit in the class, but that they have access to general education peers, they have access to content experts providing instruction, like we were talking about in the previous discussion, and also, in addition, receive the services and supports on their IEPs so that they can access and make progress in the grade and age appropriate general curriculum.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that great explanation, executive summary. And I don't think we'll finish today. So what I would like to ask you for, Leah, when we meet again and talk about this next month, is your professional opinion of these recommendations. And I know that that's it gives you a month to think about how you'll provide that tactfully but honestly, but I think we need your expertise to be able to weigh these recommendations. So with that, Mr. Phelps, would you like to introduce yourself and speak with the committee regarding this memo?
Yeah, I will. Thank you so much. So my name is Steve Phelps. I want to thank you guys for making me feel special today. Your whole discussion about licensing. I'm one of the few teachers who have a level 4 math license and a special education endorsement both. So thank you. There are not a lot of us out there, but I think it's important. One of the barriers we have is teacher knowledge is identified in there. But when we looked at the barriers, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about increasing capacity, it was about increasing efficacy. When we look at inclusion, special education can't solve inclusion by ourselves. It's not, because it involves so much of the general education population and general education teachers, we have to look outside of just the special education department. So this is the first memo that I remember in my 3 years on the panel where we've really made suggestions outside of the realm of special education. But if we're going to talk about inclusion, we have to address some of those procedures and policies and increase that capacity and efficacy in that arena as well. Because inclusion, like I said, we're not solving it strictly in special education. One of the things I always point out, so I taught math for 14 years before I became a special education teacher. I have a parent of 2 kids with disabilities and an advocate for kids with disabilities. And one of the things I always point out is it takes an entire team. We always talk about that, but most of the breadth of special education is put on the special education teacher. In the 14 years I was a gen ed teacher, I never once got asked about specific accommodations for specific students of how I was doing it, or trained on how providing specific accommodations. So there are some of those things that we sort of leave the special ed realm. In the special ed realm, we kind of have to get away from that and open it up a little bit more. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this memo, is saying, let's open up collaboration and increase the efficacy and the capacity of the system as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you so much for enduring this full meeting and providing that information from a real teacher in the field. That's very helpful. My version of your statement is every teacher is a special education teacher. And I think there is some understanding that needs to move beyond the policy level to discuss that. With that, if the committee is willing or doesn't object, let me say it that way, we will continue this discussion next month, because I really would like to hear from our experts about the possibilities of this and their part in working with USEEP and the development of these recommendations. So any final comments, or we have about 3 minutes. Anybody on the committee, would any committee member like to make any comments? I've expressed my desire for Dr. Voorhees next month. Anybody, does anyone else have anything to add? Cindy?
I would just say thank you to both who've spoken today. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. I think this is an important area that we need to work on. I think also feedback coming back next week is going to be important. What's in our realm of, what's in our lane? What can we do? What do we have control over? I mean, there's some things that we can require or do, and there are other things that are LEA specific that we may not be able to. So I just like to have that a little bit fleshed out for us, and I'm excited to move forward in this space. Thanks.
That is an excellent, I really appreciate that reminder of our limitations. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to committee members. Thanks for everyone's preparation. Thank you to our employees and our specialists. You add so much to our discussion, and you do it so artfully and with such just great expertise. So thank you very much. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Angie. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.